Who let this gutter trash into a donor gala? The milkshake crashed over Eleanor's head, thick and freezing, splashing across her face and soaking into her dress, while laughter burst around her and phones flew up to capture every second. He stepped closer, smiling like humiliation was his favorite sport. You really thought you could stand here with people who matter? Her breath caught. One unsteady hand rose to her hair. Shock flickered across her face before she looked at him as if her mind had not fully caught up to what he had just done. Liquid slid from her chin to the floor while the room held still, waiting for her to fall apart. He looked at her like she was something worthless he could crush for entertainment. He had no idea he had just made a spectacle of the one woman who could end his future with a word. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Eleanor Graves adjusted her emerald dress as she stepped from the town car, the flash of cameras momentarily lighting up her face. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. The marble steps of Westfield Hall gleamed under the evening lights, polished to mirror-like perfection just like everything else at Grayson University. She paused, taking in the scene. Wealthy donors in designer clothes laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Security guards with earpieces stood at attention, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Students selected to serve as hosts wore forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was her first official appearance since accepting the position, though her appointment wouldn't be announced until tonight. President Halston had been clear. Just observe. Get a feel for the players. So far, no one had recognized her. She was just another face in the crowd, which suited her perfectly. The grand hall sparkled with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that cost more than most students' monthly rent. Eleanor accepted a glass of water from a passing server, declining the champagne. She needed clarity tonight. $5 million from the Carmichael Foundation, she overheard a trustee boasting nearby. They practically begged us to take it. Eleanor made a mental note of the name. 5 weeks ago, she'd been reviewing cases of academic discrimination. Now she was watching money flow through a system she'd been hired to reform. The irony wasn't lost on her. Across the room, laughter erupted louder than the rest of the polite chatter. Eleanor's gaze drifted to a group of young men in expensive suits, their ties already loosened despite the formal setting. At their center stood Travis Langford, son of Victor Langford, the university's largest individual donor. Travis threw his head back, laughing at his own joke. He was handsome in the way privilege often crafted, tall with perfect teeth and the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. His friends circled him like planets around a sun, desperate for his approval. And then Professor Williams had the nerve to say my paper needed substantial revision, Travis was saying, his voice carrying across the room. Dad made a call, and suddenly my C+ became an A. Magic! His friends laughed on cue. Eleanor sipped her water, watching. Travis caught her eye briefly, then dismissed her just as quickly. She was middle-aged, black, and standing alone, clearly not important in his world. She moved toward a quiet corner where she could better hear a conversation between two board members. Halston promised we're cleaning house in administration, a silver-haired woman was saying. Too many bleeding hearts making decisions based on fairness rather than the bottom line. The new dean better understand how things work here, her companion replied. We don't need another crusader. Eleanor kept her face neutral, though her fingers tightened around her water glass. They had no idea who they were talking about, who was standing feet away. On the other side of the room, Travis had grown bored. The gala wasn't delivering enough excitement. His eyes scanned for entertainment and landed again on the woman in the emerald dress, the one standing alone. Something about her calm dignity irritated him. Who's that? He asked his friend Marcus. No idea. Probably some diversity hire from administration. Travis snorted. Watch this. He moved toward a catering station, grabbing a thick vanilla milkshake from a dessert tray despite the server's protest. Sir, Those are for the dessert service. My father writes checks that keep this place running, Travis snapped. I'll take what I want. His friends followed, phones already out, anticipating something worth recording. Travis's lips curled into a smirk as they encouraged him with whispered dares. Do it. She won't say anything. This'll go viral. Eleanor felt the shift in energy behind her. Years as a civil rights attorney had given her a sixth sense for approaching trouble. But she remained still, listening to the board members discuss budget cuts to scholarship programs while raising coaching salaries. She could feel eyes on her back. Someone was approaching. Travis moved with exaggerated stealth, milkshake held high above his head. His friends positioned themselves for the best camera angles. His grin widened, already imagining the woman's shock, the laughter that would follow, the story they'd tell for weeks. The milkshake hovered just inches above Eleanor's perfectly styled hair, Travis's arm poised to tip it. The milkshake crashed down on Eleanor's head with a sickening splat. Cold vanilla cream exploded across her scalp, drenching her meticulously styled hair and seeping into her emerald silk gown. The thick liquid dripped down her forehead, across her cheekbones, and onto her shoulders. Gasps erupted around the room. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Conversations died instantly. Eleanor did not flinch. She did not jump. She did not scream. She stood perfectly still as the cold shock penetrated her skin and the humiliation hung in the air. In the silence that followed, all that could be heard was the soft drip, drip, drip of vanilla cream hitting the polished marble floor. Phones rose from pockets and purses. Camera flashes popped. The moment was being preserved from every angle, immortalized in digital eternity. Travis threw his head back and laughed, the empty cup still in his hand. Lighten up! It's just a joke. His voice boomed through the stunned quiet. Someone needed to liven up this boring party. His friends snickered behind their phones, still recording. A heavy-set donor in the corner chuckled nervously. Boys will be boys, he muttered to no one in particular. Others in the room looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shoes or the ceiling's architecture. No one moved to help. No one offered a napkin. No one intervened. Eleanor remained motionless, allowing the full weight of the moment to settle across the room. Cream dripped from her chin onto her collarbone. The expensive gown was ruined, but her eyes remained clear and focused. Slowly, deliberately, she turned. Each degree of her rotation seemed to tighten the air in the room. When she fully faced Travis, she locked eyes with him. Her gaze was not angry. It was something worse. It was assessing, calculating, as if she were memorizing every detail of his face for a purpose he couldn't yet comprehend. The silence stretched. Travis's laughter began to falter under her stare. Eleanor took one step forward, leaving a wet footprint on the marble. Then another. With each step, drops of vanilla cream marked her path toward Travis. Whoa, Travis said, backing up slightly. Take a joke. It's just a milkshake. Eleanor's voice, when it finally came, was quiet. So quiet that people leaned in to hear. Is this how Langford men solve problems? With childish pranks when words failed them? Travis blinked, surprised she knew his name. How did you? Your father would be fascinated to know. This is how his legacy continues, Eleanor continued, her voice slicing through his question. Around them, Travis's friends began to retreat, lowering their phones. The fun was transforming into something uncomfortable, something with teeth. Someone whispered, Should we call security? Another voice replied, And say what? That we need to remove a woman covered in milkshake that someone else poured on her? Travis's face flushed. Look, lady, if you can't handle what? Eleanor asked, still calm despite the cream dripping from her earlobes. Your desperate need for attention? Your belief that humiliating strangers constitutes humor? She took another step closer. Travis took another step back. You want everyone looking at you, she continued. Well, now they're looking at both of us. Shall we give them something worth seeing? The tension in the room pulled tighter. Eleanor made no move to clean herself. She forced them all to witness her degradation, to participate in their shared discomfort. Travis looked around for support, but his friends had created distance. Even the donor who had laughed was now studying his drink with intense focus. The university president finally pushed through the crowd, his face slack with horror. "What in God's name?" he began, then froze when he saw Eleanor's condition. Eleanor didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes remained fixed on Travis. "You just made a very expensive mistake," she said, her voice steady and controlled. The president rushed toward them, panic visible in every line of his face. Richard Halston pushed through the final row of onlookers, his normally composed demeanor fractured by panic. Sweat beaded along his hairline, despite the room's perfect temperature. He reached Eleanor's side and stared in horror at the milk dripping from her elegant gown. "My God, Eleanor," he said, his voice too loud in the hushed room. "I can't begin to... This is absolutely..." His words stumbled over each other as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. Eleanor made no move to take it. "President Halston," she acknowledged calmly, as though they were meeting for coffee rather than standing in a puddle of vanilla milkshake. Halston's attention snapped to Travis, who was still wearing a shadow of his earlier smirk. "Mr. Langford," he barked, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Travis shrugged, glancing around at his scattered friends for support that didn't materialize. "Just lightening the mood. These events are always so stuffy." He gestured vaguely. "Nobody even knew who she was. Didn't know who..." Halston's face flushed deep red. "That's your explanation? Come on, it's just a joke," Travis said, rolling his eyes. "My family donated the entire west wing of the business school. We can afford to pay for her dry cleaning." Halston stepped between Eleanor and Travis, cutting him off with a raised hand. "That's quite enough." He turned to address the room, straightening his bow tie with trembling fingers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice finding its practiced public speaking cadence. "For those of you who haven't yet had the privilege of meeting her, allow me to introduce Dr. Eleanor Graves." He gestured toward Eleanor, who stood perfectly still, making no effort to minimize her humiliation. "Dr. Graves joins us from Harvard Law, where she served as ethics chair. The board has appointed her as our new Dean of Academic Affairs, effective immediately." His eyes swept the crowd. She was specifically recruited to address certain concerns about standards and integrity at this institution. The room's atmosphere shifted like a sudden change in barometric pressure. Shocked murmurs replaced awkward giggles. Several donors exchanged alarmed glances. "Dean Graves will have full authority to review all academic policies, admissions practices, and..." Halston's gaze landed pointedly on Travis. "Student conduct standards." Travis's face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks as the magnitude of his mistake began to register. His eyes darted around the room, searching for escape. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "How was I supposed to know?" Eleanor finally spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly despite its low volume. "Would it have mattered, Mr. Langford? Would knowing my title have changed your behavior?" She tilted her head slightly, causing more milkshake to drip onto the floor. "Or is respect only reserved for those you deem important?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. A woman approached with napkins, but Eleanor subtly shook her head. She refused to clean herself, forcing everyone to confront the result of Travis's actions. The vanilla cream continued to drip, marking time with soft splats against the marble floor. Across the room, donors huddled in whispered conversations. A board member checked his watch and made for the exit. Another pulled out his phone, typing frantically. Travis took a small step backward. "Look, if I'd known you were important..." "That's exactly the problem," Eleanor cut him off. "In your world, some people deserve dignity, and others don't." Travis's jaw clenched. The remnants of his bravado crumbled as he realized the room had turned against him. Even his friends kept their distance, suddenly fascinated by the ceiling, the floor, anything but meeting his gaze. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "It was just a stupid—" The crowd parted silently as a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit approached. Victor Langford moved with the confidence of someone who owned not just the room, but the building itself. His face betrayed nothing as he took in the scene. Eleanor standing resolute in her ruined dress, his son shrinking by the second, the university president hovering nervously between them. Victor reached his son and placed a firm hand on Travis's shoulder, fingers digging in just slightly. "That's enough," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. Victor Langford pulled Travis slightly back, positioning himself between his son and Eleanor. His movement was smooth, practiced, the instinctive shield of a predator protecting its young. Travis stumbled a half-step backward, relief washing over his face as his father took control of the situation. "Dean Graves," Victor said, his voice warm and resonant, "please accept my deepest apologies for this unfortunate incident." He gestured toward Eleanor's ruined dress with a perfectly calibrated expression of regret. "My son's behavior tonight was completely unacceptable." The room grew quiet, all eyes fixed on this unexpected confrontation between power and authority. Travis has always been spirited, but this crosses a line that should never be crossed. Victor's hand remained firmly on Travis's shoulder, squeezing just enough to communicate private warning. Youth is no excuse for disrespect. Eleanor stood motionless, milkshake still dripping from her hair onto her shoulders. She said nothing, her silence forcing Victor to continue filling the space. "I'd like to propose making this right," Victor said, his voice dropping to a tone of confidential sincerity. "The university's scholarship fund could benefit from a donation of, let's say, $1 million. He smiled, showing perfect teeth. "A contribution earmarked specifically for underrepresented students." President Halston's eyes widened. Board members exchanged glances, subtle nods passing between them. The magic number had been spoken, the solution offered. Such a substantial gift might help ensure this regrettable moment becomes a catalyst for positive change, Victor continued, rather than a source of ongoing division. Several trustees nodded eagerly. A woman in pearls whispered, "Gracious response." The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The crisis was being managed, contained, transformed into opportunity. Eleanor watched the performance with analytical precision. She noted which board members relaxed at the mention of money. She observed how quickly Halston's posture changed from protective to accommodating. She caught the calculated timing of Victor's pauses, the strategic placement of his free hand, open, palm up, a gesture of apparent sincerity. "Travis," Victor prompted quietly, "you have something to say." Travis stepped forward, eyes fixed somewhere near Eleanor's shoulder. "I apologize for my behavior," he mumbled. "It was inappropriate and disrespectful." The words came out flat, rehearsed. His gaze flickered briefly to meet Eleanor's before sliding away again. His hands remained in his pockets. "I hope you can forgive a stupid mistake," he added, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. Victor smoothly interjected before Travis could say more. "We all make errors in judgment. The measure of character is how we make amends." He smiled at the room, including everyone in his performance of reasonableness. "I believe in second chances, don't you, Dean Graves?" The question hung in the air, its implied answer clear to everyone. The board members' postures had already relaxed. Two donors near the bar resumed their conversation. The incident was being packaged away, the narrative rewritten in real time, a momentary unpleasantness transformed into a generous donation. A waiter appeared with fresh napkins. Eleanor finally accepted one, but rather than cleaning herself, she simply held it, turning it slowly between her fingers. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable, a rejection of the neat resolution being offered. "Mr. Langford," she said finally, her voice carrying without effort, "your financial gesture is noted. The room waited for the expected acceptance. It didn't come. "I will consider your son's apology," Eleanor continued, her eyes steady on Victor's face. "However, I would appreciate a private meeting with you and President Halston. Immediately." Her tone was polite but unyielding, a clear signal that this matter was far from resolved. A flicker of annoyance crossed Victor's face before his practiced smile returned. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Perhaps in President Halston's office? After you've had a chance to refresh." "Now would be preferable," Eleanor replied, still not wiping away the milkshake. "Just as I am." The calculation was clear. She would not allow them the comfort of forgetting what had happened, not even for a moment. The silence in President Halston's office pressed down like a physical weight. Eleanor sat straight-backed in her chair, the dried milkshake still clinging to her hair and staining the shoulders of her gown. The sweet, sickening smell of vanilla filled the small space. Across from her, Victor Langford leaned back in his chair with practiced ease, though his fingers tapped a steady rhythm against the leather armrest. Travis slouched beside his father, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. President Halston stood awkwardly near his desk, his hands clasped in front of him. "Let's resolve this unfortunate situation quickly," Victor finally said, breaking the silence. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to having problems disappear. "I believe we can find a solution that benefits everyone." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She was watching Travis, noting how he couldn't seem to sit still, shifting in his seat, checking his phone, entirely disconnected from the seriousness of the moment. "My family has supported this institution for 3 generations," Victor continued. "The Langford Business School wouldn't exist without our endowment. The research center, the library expansion." He spread his hands wide. "Our commitment speaks for itself." "It certainly does," Eleanor replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I've already offered a substantial donation as a gesture of goodwill," Victor pressed on. "Perhaps we could direct those funds toward one of your initiatives? A scholarship program, perhaps. Something meaningful that turns this unfortunate incident into an opportunity." Halston nodded eagerly. "That's an excellent suggestion. We could establish a diversity fund in the dean's name." "No," Eleanor said. The single word hung in the air. "I'm not here to negotiate a price for my dignity," she continued. "I'm here to inform you that as of tomorrow morning, I am launching a formal investigation into donor interference in academic affairs and systemic misconduct at this university." Travis snorted. "Are you serious? Because of a stupid prank?" "Travis," Victor warned quietly. But Eleanor caught the flash of concern in his eyes. "This isn't about the milkshake," Eleanor said, turning to Travis. "Though that displayed a stunning lack of judgment. This is about the pattern of behavior it represents." "Pattern? You don't even know me," Travis scoffed. "I know enough," Eleanor replied. "I know your academic record shows a miraculous improvement every time there's a building with your family name on it. I know 3 professors suddenly changed their grading policies after meetings with the board last semester. I know about the disciplinary hearings that mysteriously disappeared." Travis's smirk faltered. Victor's face remained composed, but his fingers had stopped their tapping. "Dean Graves," Halston intervened, his voice strained. "These are serious allegations without evidence. Perhaps we should discuss this more carefully before—" "The evidence exists, President Halston," Eleanor cut in. "The emails regarding the Thompson Scholarship withdrawal. The adjusted admissions criteria that coincided with certain donations. The pressure applied to Professor Martinez when she failed a particular student." Victor leaned forward, abandoning his relaxed posture. "You've been here less than a month. Where exactly are you getting this information?" "I'm thorough," Eleanor replied simply, "and corruption leaves traces." "This is ridiculous," Travis burst out. "You're just trying to make yourself important. Nobody cares about your stupid investigation." "Travis, be quiet," Victor snapped, real anger breaking through his polished exterior for the first time. Eleanor stood, smoothing her ruined dress. "I'll be requesting records dating back 5 years, full academic transcripts, donation histories, board meeting minutes, private communications regarding admissions, and disciplinary decisions." She looked directly at Victor. "I suggest you prepare accordingly. The board will never approve this witch hunt," Victor said, standing to meet her gaze. "They already have," Eleanor replied. "It was my condition for accepting this position. Full investigative authority, independent of donor influence." Halston paled visibly. Travis looked between his father and Eleanor, suddenly uncertain. "You're making a mistake," Victor said quietly. "You have no idea what you're starting." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, moving toward the door. "I know exactly what I'm doing." She paused, hand on the doorknob. "One more thing. This conversation is now on record." Victor's carefully maintained facade cracked completely. His expression hardened into something cold and dangerous, a silent declaration that the rules of engagement had just changed. Eleanor held his gaze for a moment longer before opening the door and stepping out, leaving the 3 men in stunned silence behind her. Eleanor stepped out of the office, the weight of what had just transpired settling on her shoulders. The milkshake had dried into her hair, making it stiff. The vanilla smell clung to her like a reminder of public humiliation, but her spine remained straight as steel as she walked back into the gala. Conversations hushed as she passed. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Glasses paused halfway to lips. She was no longer invisible. Now she was a spectacle for entirely different reasons. The power dynamics of the room had reshuffled in her absence. She moved with deliberate calm toward the bar, requesting a glass of water. The bartender handed it over with wide eyes, unable to hide his curiosity about her ruined dress. "Quite an evening," she remarked casually, taking a sip. Professor Marlene Jenkins, a senior faculty member from the English department, approached cautiously. "Dean Graves," she said, her voice hushed. "Are you all right? That was unacceptable behavior from the Langford boy." Eleanor nodded slightly. "I'm fine, thank you. Though I am curious about something, Professor Jenkins. Have you ever felt pressure to adjust grades for certain students?" Jenkins blinked rapidly, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute. Well, that's rather direct. I prefer direct questions. They yield more honest answers." Jenkins glanced around nervously. "This isn't really the venue for such a discussion. And yet it seems the perfect place to demonstrate that actions have consequences," Eleanor replied softly. "Even for those who believe themselves untouchable." Jenkins took a step back. "I should circulate. Lovely meeting you officially, Dean." Eleanor watched her hurry away, mentally noting the reaction. She moved toward Professor Alan Morgan next, a tenured physics professor known for his research grants. "Professor Morgan," she said warmly, "I'm looking forward to reviewing your department's grading distribution patterns from the past few terms." Morgan's smile froze. "Oh? Any particular reason?" "Statistical anomalies," Eleanor replied simply. "Some students seem to defy academic gravity. I find that fascinating." "These events aren't really for work talk," Morgan deflected, his eyes darting to the exit. "Would you prefer we discuss it in my office next week?" He hesitated. "Perhaps. Yes. We should schedule something." Across the room, Eleanor spotted Travis. He had rejoined his circle of friends, gesturing dramatically. His face was flushed with anger rather than the smug confidence he'd displayed earlier. She could read the shift in his body language, the defensive posture, the way he leaned in to whisper something that made his companions look her way. She caught fragments of conversation as she passed nearby groups. Completely overreacted. Threatened his father, can you imagine? Some kind of vendetta against donors. The narrative was already being rewritten. Eleanor had expected nothing less. She approached Professor Daniel Reeves, who stood alone by a window, nursing what appeared to be scotch. Unlike the others, he didn't flinch when she approached. "Professor Reeves," she said quietly. "Dean Graves," he replied, his voice steady but his eyes troubled. "Dramatic first gala. I understand you maintain the departmental records for computer science." He nodded slowly. 15 years now. "And in those 15 years, have you noticed patterns that concerned you?" Reeves took a long sip of his drink. "Everyone notices patterns. Not everyone can afford to acknowledge them." Eleanor studied him. "And if someone could protect those who speak up?" "Protection is temporary. Consequences are permanent." He glanced across the room toward the board members laughing with donors. "Trust is earned, Dean Graves." "Fair enough," Eleanor replied. As she turned to leave, Reeves added quietly, "But some of us have been waiting a long time for someone willing to earn it." The gala gradually wound down, the energy draining from the room as guests filtered out. Eleanor remained, accepting both awkward condolences and cold shoulders with the same steady composure. As she collected her coat, a server approached with a folded napkin. "Someone asked me to give you this," he said. Eleanor opened it once she was alone. Written in hurried handwriting were a few simple words. "Library Archive Room. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. I have documentation." At the bottom were the initials DR. She carefully folded the napkin and slipped it into her purse, her face revealing nothing as she finally left the gala behind. The campus felt different at night. Shadows stretched across walkways where students usually gathered, and the buildings stood like silent guardians of secrets, long kept. Eleanor moved quickly, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the Administrative Sciences building. The milkshake had dried in her hair, making it stiff and uncomfortable, but she hadn't taken time to wash it out. Some battles required visible scars. Professor Reeves had texted her the door code 30 minutes after she'd left the gala. Now he waited inside his office, a small lamp casting just enough light to see the worry lines deepening around his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Eleanor said, closing the door behind her. Reeves nodded, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Papers were already spread out before him. "I've been keeping my own records," he said quietly. "Not officially, of course. Just notes." Eleanor sat down, studying the professor's face. Fear lived there, but something else, too. Relief, perhaps. The relief of finally unburdening oneself. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. Reeves ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Years. At least 7 that I can document personally." He pushed several spreadsheets toward her. "These are grade distributions for courses where certain students, donor children, board members' relatives, were enrolled." Eleanor examined the papers. Statistical anomalies jumped out immediately. Specific students performing dramatically better in certain classes than their overall GPAs would predict. "Travis Langford," she said, pointing to a highlighted row. Reeves nodded grimly. "Failed 3 prerequisite courses in his first year, yet somehow passed the advanced seminars that followed. Technically impossible. Who applied the pressure? Usually department chairs, sometimes directly from administration." Reeves pulled out another folder. "Last fall, Travis was failing my algorithms course. Hadn't turned in a single complete assignment. Then I got this." He handed Eleanor an email. The message was carefully worded but unmistakable in its intent. "Reconsider the grading approach for students with unique learning styles, particularly naming Travis." "Did you comply?" Eleanor asked, her voice neutral. Reeves looked down. "I gave him a C-. Enough to pass." The admission seemed to pain him physically. "They reminded me about my tenure review." Eleanor leaned forward. "Daniel, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about grades. Systems like this don't corrupt just one part of an institution. If they're doing this, they're doing worse." "I know," he whispered. "But you don't understand what they're capable of." "I understand perfectly." Her voice remained level. "People like Travis Langford and his father believe rules exist for others. Every time we bend to that belief, we strengthen it." A sound from the hallway, footsteps passing by, made Reeves flinch visibly. They both fell silent until the footsteps faded. "They'll come after you," he said finally. "They'll find something." anything to discredit you. Let them try. Eleanor's calm was unwavering. But I need evidence. Real evidence, not just statistics that could be explained away. Reeves hesitated, fingers drumming nervously on his desk. What you're asking could cost me everything. And what will it cost the next generation if we do nothing? She met his gaze directly. How many students worked honestly for grades they never received because someone bought their spot? The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Reeves closed his eyes briefly. I need time, he finally said, to gather everything, organize it properly. How much time? 3 days, maybe 4. He glanced at the door. No one can know we've spoken. They watch closely, especially new administrators who might rock the boat. Eleanor nodded. I understand discretion, but I won't back down, Professor Reeves. Not on this. Daniel, he corrected softly. If we're conspirators now, you might as well use my first name. He turned to a filing cabinet behind him, unlocked the bottom drawer, and removed a manila folder that looked worn around the edges. His hands trembled slightly as he handed it to Eleanor. This contains examples of Travis's actual work alongside the grades recorded. The discrepancy is significant. Eleanor opened the folder, scanning the contents. Failing papers with passing grades, incomplete assignments marked as complete. This is just the beginning, Daniel whispered, suddenly glancing at his watch. You need to go now. The security guard makes rounds at 10:30, and questions would be problematic. Eleanor closed the folder, tucking it into her bag. The weight of it felt significant against her hip. The first piece of concrete evidence in what she now understood would be a much larger battle than she'd initially imagined. Eleanor sat at her desk, coffee cooling beside her keyboard as she stared at her computer screen. The video had appeared overnight and already had thousands of shares. Someone had filmed the entire milkshake incident at the gala, but the footage wasn't what Eleanor remembered living through. The video started midway through the confrontation. There was no context, no beginning where Travis dumped the milkshake on her head. Instead, it began with Eleanor already dripping with vanilla, stepping toward Travis with what the camera angle made look like aggression. Her calm words, "You just made a very expensive mistake," sounded like a threat without the context. The comments below the video were worse. Who does this woman think she is? Another angry black woman can't take a joke. Typical overreaction. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling her jaw tighten. She closed the tab but opened another news site. There it was again, this time with a headline, "Questions arise about new dean's temperament after gala confrontation." The article quoted anonymous sources, claiming Eleanor had a history of overreacting and making accusations. There wasn't a single mention of what Travis had actually done. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel Reeves. "Have you seen it? This is what I meant. Be careful." Eleanor set the phone down without responding. She needed time to think. Leaving her office, she walked across the quad toward the administration building. Students glanced up from their phones as she passed. Some whispered behind their hands. A few openly stared. One group fell completely silent as she approached, then burst into laughter after she passed. She caught fragments of conversation. "That's her. Completely lost it at the gala. Threatening some kid over a prank." Near the fountain in the center of campus, she spotted Travis holding court with a group of friends. He was pantomiming something, exaggerating his movements to laughter. When he saw Eleanor, he raised his voice. "Better watch out," he called across the space between them. "She might report you for laughing too loud." His friends erupted in laughter. Several pulled out phones, clearly hoping for another incident they could film and share. Eleanor kept walking, her face a careful mask of indifference. But inside, rage burned steady and bright. This was a coordinated attack. The Langfords were powerful, but she hadn't expected them to mobilize so quickly. In the administration building, her assistant looked up nervously. "3 of your meetings canceled this morning. Professor Martin, Dr. Williams, and the student government president. Did they give reasons?" Scheduling conflicts, the assistant said, not meeting her eyes. All of them, Eleanor nodded. Any messages? President Halston called. He'd like to see you when you have a moment. I'll go now, Eleanor said. Halston's office was larger than hers, with views of the entire east side of campus. He stood when she entered but didn't come around the desk to greet her. Eleanor, he said, gesturing to a chair. Please, sit. She remained standing. You wanted to see me? Halston sighed. I think we need to discuss strategy here. This video situation is unfortunate. Unfortunate? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. It's deliberately manipulated. Perhaps, but perception is reality in these situations. Halston's smile was thin. I think the best approach is to let things cool down. Maybe delay your investigation for a few weeks. Eleanor studied him. You're telling me to back off. I'm suggesting a tactical retreat, he corrected. The Langfords are well connected. This doesn't need to become a public spectacle. It already is a public spectacle, Eleanor said. One they created. All the more reason to step back and let it blow over. Halston spread his hands. Your position here is new. You have time to build relationships before tackling these sensitive issues. Eleanor understood perfectly. Halston wasn't an ally. He was a weather vane, turning with the prevailing wind. And right now, that wind was blowing against her. Back in her office, Eleanor closed the door as notifications continued to ping on her computer. 20 new emails had arrived while she'd been gone. The subject lines told her everything. Concerns about leadership. Request for clarification on recent events. Question about administrative priorities. She sat heavily in her chair, the reality of her situation sinking in. This wasn't just a campus battle anymore. The Langfords had taken it public, controlling the narrative before she could even begin her investigation. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Eleanor hesitated, then answered. Dean Graves, she said, her voice steady despite everything. Eleanor checked her watch. Travis Langford's business ethics class, the irony wasn't lost on her, would end in 3 minutes. She positioned herself outside the lecture hall doors, manila folder in hand, back straight, waiting. Students began trickling out, many glancing at her with curious expressions. Some had clearly seen the video. They whispered and pointed. Eleanor didn't flinch. She had spent a lifetime being stared at, being the only black woman in rooms of power. This was nothing new. When Travis emerged, surrounded by his usual entourage, she stepped forward. Mr. Langford, a moment? His head snapped toward her, surprise flickering across his face before morphing into a smirk. Dean Graves, shouldn't you be off somewhere filing complaints? Eleanor didn't take the bait. I believe we have unfinished business. She opened the folder and held out a sheet of paper. A transcript with clear markings showing grade alterations. The red ink stood out starkly against the white paper. Professor Reynolds's original gradebook shows you failed macroeconomics with a 32%. Yet somehow your official transcript shows a B+. Eleanor's voice remained measured and clear. Care to explain the discrepancy? A crowd began to form. Students slowed their pace, sensing the tension, gathering in a loose circle around them. Travis laughed, the sound forced and hollow. Everyone knows how this place works. My dad makes donations, I get grades. Big deal. He looked around at his friends, seeking confirmation. Some nodded, but others looked uncomfortable with his bluntness. So you admit to academic fraud? Eleanor pressed, her voice carrying just enough to ensure the growing audience could hear. I admit to playing the game, Travis shot back. Same as everybody else with money. Don't act shocked. It's how the world works. Eleanor pulled out another paper. And this altered essay for Professor Martinez's class? The one where the TA's original comments indicate plagiarism, but the final grade is an A? Students were openly watching now, phones discreetly raised. Travis's casual attitude hardened. You're really pushing this, aren't you? He stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. Look around. Nobody cares. I'll still graduate. I'll still get whatever job I want. And you'll still be the angry black woman who couldn't handle a joke. His voice had dropped, meant for her ears only, but in the silence of the hallway, it carried. Several students gasped. Eleanor didn't back away. This isn't about jokes, Mr. Langford. This is about integrity, something your family's money can't buy. Travis's face flushed red. He moved even closer, his chest nearly touching the papers she still held between them. You think you can come in here and tear everything down? Do you know who my father is? Who I am? I know exactly who you are, Eleanor replied, unflinching. That's the problem. Two security officers approached rapidly from the end of the hallway. Eleanor noticed them, but continued addressing Travis, whose voice had risen to a near shout. You're nothing! Just another diversity hire trying to make a name for herself. Travis was yelling now, spittle flying from his mouth. My family built half this campus. The security officers pushed through the crowd. Eleanor expected them to address Travis's behavior, but instead, one of them turned directly to her. Dean Graves, we need you to come with us, the taller officer said firmly. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Excuse me? We've received complaints about a disturbance. We need to clear the hallway. His hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching but clearly indicating she should move. This student just admitted to academic fraud, Eleanor stated, keeping her voice level despite her rising indignation. And I'm the disturbance? The second officer spoke quietly. Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Please come with us now. Students were recording openly now. The injustice was so blatant, so public, that Eleanor almost couldn't believe it was happening. But it was. The system was protecting Travis, just as it always had. This isn't over, she told Travis, as the officers began escorting her away, one on each side. Travis's face split into a triumphant grin. He raised his phone, camera pointed directly at her. For my followers, he announced loudly, this is what happens when you try to cancel me. The gathered crowd parted as Eleanor was led down the hallway, her folder of evidence still clutched tightly in her hands, her dignity intact despite the public humiliation. Behind her, she could hear Travis laughing with his friends, the sound echoing off the walls like a victory cry. That evening, Eleanor sat in the university's wood-paneled boardroom. The emergency meeting had been called with barely an hour's notice. Around the massive oak table sat 12 board members, their faces illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. Richard Halston occupied his usual place at the head, a position that should have signaled authority, but now seemed merely ceremonial, because Victor Langford commanded the room. He stood at the opposite end, a presentation already loaded on the projector. Eleanor noticed the time, 9:17 p.m., an unusual hour for official business, unless someone wanted minimal witnesses. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Victor began, his voice smooth and practiced. But given today's disturbing events, we couldn't delay. Eleanor sat straight-backed, her folder of evidence placed purposefully in front of her. She'd made copies, 3 sets, before this meeting. Dean Graves has been with us less than a week, Victor continued, clicking to his first slide, the edited video of the gala incident. And in that time, she has created unprecedented disruption. Eleanor opened her mouth to object, but Halston raised a hand, silencing her. Please, Eleanor. Mr. Langford has the floor. Victor nodded appreciatively. Today, she publicly confronted a student, my son, creating a scene that required security intervention. He clicked through photos of her being escorted away, carefully selected angles that made her appear aggressive. This follows a pattern of erratic behavior, Victor continued. Accusations without evidence, threats of investigations that would damage this institution's reputation, and what appears to be a vendetta against certain donor families. Eleanor watched the board members' faces, some uncomfortable, others nodding along. Halston stared at his notepad, refusing to meet her eyes. Mr. Langford, Eleanor finally interrupted, I have concrete evidence of academic misconduct. She pushed her folder forward. Grade alterations, documentation of pressure on faculty, and fragments and hearsay. Victor dismissed without looking at the folder. Nothing that would stand up to serious scrutiny. A board member, Dr. Wilson from engineering, cleared his throat. Shouldn't we at least review what Dean Graves has collected? I have reviewed it. Halston finally spoke, still not looking at Eleanor. It's concerning, but inconclusive. We would need substantially more to justify the kind of accusations being made. Eleanor felt a cold weight in her stomach. Professor Reeves provided direct evidence of grade manipulation. He should be here to speak. Professor Reeves, Victor cut in, contacted me personally this afternoon. He claims you pressured him into making allegations he couldn't substantiate. Eleanor's blood ran cold. That's a lie. He's prepared a statement. Victor slid copies around the table, conveniently skipping Eleanor. The statement was brief, clinical. Reeves retracting everything, claiming misunderstanding and pressure. His betrayal was complete. This is ridiculous, Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice level. You're manipulating evidence and silencing witnesses. Victor sighed theatrically. And now unfounded accusations against board members. This is precisely the concerning behavior we're addressing. For 45 excruciating minutes, Eleanor watched her credibility being systematically dismantled. Every piece of evidence questioned, every action reframed. When she spoke, she was defensive. When she presented facts, she was obsessive. Finally, Halston cleared his throat. I believe we should vote on the recommendation before us. I haven't even been allowed to properly present my case, Eleanor objected. You've spoken multiple times, Dean Graves, Halston said, still not meeting her eyes. The motion, Victor announced, is to place Dean Graves on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full review of her fitness for the position. The vote was called. 9 in favor, 3 abstentions, no opposition. Eleanor stood, gathering her materials with steady hands that defied the fury building inside her. This institution is rotting from within, and you all know it. This vote doesn't change the truth. Your university access will be temporarily suspended, Halston mumbled, finally looking at her. Standard procedure for administrative leave. Of course it is, Eleanor replied coldly. She walked out with her head high, feeling 12 pairs of eyes on her back. The hallway outside was empty. Everyone gone for the day. No witnesses to what had just happened. At the main entrance, Eleanor swiped her keycard. The reader flashed red. Already deactivated. She pushed against the door, but it remained locked. A security guard approached from inside, looking uncomfortable. I'll have to let you out, ma'am. Your access has been... Well, I understand, Eleanor said quietly. As she stepped into the cool night air, the lights in the lobby switched off behind her. The building went dark, as if erasing her presence completely. Eleanor stood alone in the darkness, clutching her folder of evidence, suddenly locked out of the institution she had been hired to reform. The night air bit at Eleanor's skin. She stood motionless, clutching her folder against her chest, staring at the dark university building that had just expelled her. The campus was eerily quiet. Empty pathways lit by scattered lampposts, shadows stretching across manicured lawns. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was calculated humiliation. They'd waited until everyone had gone home before voting. No witnesses, no immediate support. She was supposed to slink away, wounded and defeated. She straightened her spine. That wasn't going to happen. As she turned toward the parking lot, footsteps approached from behind a nearby oak tree. Dean Graves? Eleanor tensed, ready for another confrontation. A young woman stepped into the light, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes sharp with intelligence and caution. I'm Lila Grant, the woman said, keeping her voice low. I've been waiting to speak with you. Not here, though. Eleanor studied her. The name sounded familiar. You don't know me, Lila continued, but I know exactly what they just did to you in there. She gestured toward a blue sedan parked at the edge of the lot. Please, I need 15 minutes of your time. Why should I trust you? Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Because 3 years ago, Victor Langford had me expelled when I questioned how his son passed advanced statistics despite never attending class. Lila's jaw tightened. And because I've spent every day since then gathering evidence against him. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You were the student who filed the academic complaint. The one that mysteriously disappeared from all records? Yes. Lila checked her watch. They'll be watching your home tonight. We should move. Against her better judgment, Eleanor nodded. 15 minutes. The car ride was silent for the first few blocks. Eleanor watched Lila's hands on the steering wheel, steady, confident. Not the movements of someone bluffing. Where are we going? Eleanor finally asked. Coffee shop on Hamilton Street. Some people want to meet you. People? Lila's mouth curled into a hint of a smile. Let's just say you're not the first person the Langfords have tried to destroy. The coffee shop was small, tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. Inside, 3 people sat in the back corner. They looked up when Lila and Eleanor entered. This is Marcus, Lila said, pointing to a man in his 30s with glasses. Former TA who refused to change grades. This is Darren. Graduated last year despite the administration's best efforts to fail him after he wrote an exposé for the school paper. And Sophia, who lost her scholarship when she reported Travis for cheating. They nodded at Eleanor, faces serious, but eyes hopeful. We call ourselves the Receipts, Lila said, sitting down, because we've been collecting them for years. Marcus pushed a laptop toward Eleanor. We heard about what happened at the gala. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone with actual power who couldn't be easily silenced. Eleanor sat down slowly. Clearly, I don't have much power now. You have more than you think, Sophia said quietly. You have us. Lila opened the laptop. We've documented everything. Grade changes, admissions fraud, money transfers to faculty accounts after certain students mysteriously passed, threatening emails to professors who wouldn't cooperate. Eleanor stared at the screen, scrolling through file after file of meticulous documentation. Text messages, emails, financial records, bank statements. How did you get all this? She asked, astonished. Carefully, Darren replied. And over time, they're arrogant. They don't think anyone's watching. But we were, Lila added. Always watching. Always collecting. We just needed someone who could actually do something with it. Eleanor looked at their faces, determined, angry, but unbroken. I was expelled with 3 months left before graduation, Lila said. Perfect GPA until I crossed the Langfords. They make examples of people who stand up to them. But there are too many of us now, Marcus added. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing what she was seeing. Her own evidence had been substantial, but this was overwhelming. Systematic, long-term corruption documented beyond question. She opened her eyes and looked at the group. Why now? Why me? Because you didn't back down at the gala, Lila said. You went straight at them instead of accepting the payoff. That tells us everything we need to know about you. Eleanor looked down at the laptop again, at the evidence these students and former students had risked everything to compile. The scope of it was staggering. Years of work. Dozens of victims. She looked up at their expectant faces and nodded slowly. All right, she said. Let's take them down. The basement room buzzed with quiet intensity as Eleanor and the group spread documents across the table. Outside, darkness had fallen, but inside, the light was harsh and unforgiving, much like the evidence they were organizing. These are the financial transfers, Marcus said, sliding over a folder. 6 payments to Professor Whitman's offshore account, each one exactly 2 weeks after he changed Travis's failing grade to a B+. Eleanor nodded, adding it to her stack. And we have Whitman's original gradebook? Screenshots, yes, Sophia confirmed. He thought deleting the digital records would be enough, but he didn't know I had access as his assistant that semester. Darren worked on 3 laptops simultaneously, organizing audio files. I've trimmed the recordings to the most damning parts. No one's going to sit through hours of material at the gala. Eleanor picked up one of the flash drives, turning it over in her hand. The weight of it seemed impossibly heavy for something so small. Are we sure about doing this publicly? The board could still— The board is part of the problem. Lila cut in, her voice firm. 3 members have children who've benefited from the same system. They've buried complaints for years. She looked Eleanor directly in the eyes. This has to be public. Undeniable. Something they can't sweep away in a private meeting. Eleanor nodded, understanding the stakes. She'd spent the last 24 hours practicing what she would say, how to present the evidence clearly and unequivocally. No emotion, just facts. Facts they couldn't dismiss. Run through it again, Lila suggested, leaning against the wall. Eleanor stood, smoothing her jacket. I'll wait until President Halston's speech ends. The timing matters. Maximum audience, minimum security interference. She held up the flash drive. I'll approach the stage, plug this in before anyone realizes what's happening. The video compilation plays first. Travis's actual classroom performance versus his grades. Then the money trail. Darren looked up from his laptop. I've tested it on their system. It'll override whatever presentation they have queued up. What about security? Marcus asked, concern etching his face. They'll try to stop you before you reach the podium. That's where we come in, Sophia said. Darren and I will create diversions on opposite sides of the room. Nothing dramatic, just enough confusion to split security's attention. Eleanor looked at each of them in turn. If this works, there will be consequences. Not just for the Langfords, but for everyone involved. The university's reputation will take a hit. Good, Lila said firmly. It should. Institutions don't change without pain. Marcus checked his watch. It's almost time. The donors will already be arriving. Across campus, in his father's mansion overlooking the university grounds, Travis adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, smirking at his reflection. The room around him was expensively furnished. Everything tailored, polished, perfect. How do I look? He called out to his friends lounging on his leather couch. Like a man who just dodged a bullet, one replied, raising a glass of whiskey. Travis laughed, feeling untouchable. That dean didn't know who she was dealing with. Dad had the board eating out of his hand. Is she still suspended? Another friend asked. Administrative leave, Travis corrected with a smug grin. Fancy way of saying fired without admitting it. She'll be gone by next week. He checked his watch, a graduation gift worth more than most cars. We should head over. Dad wants me visible tonight. Show everyone it's business as usual. Back in the basement room, Eleanor carefully placed the organized evidence into a slim briefcase. Her hands were steady, her mind clear. The fear she'd felt walking out of the board meeting had transformed into something harder, more determined. Last check, Lila said. Darren? Tech's ready. Their system security is a joke. Sophia? I've memorized the building layout. Security positions, exits, everything. Marcus? I've got backup copies of everything, stored securely off-site. No matter what happens tonight, the evidence is safe. Lila turned to Eleanor. Ready? Eleanor closed the briefcase with a decisive click. Ready. Outside, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, another former student who'd been wronged by the system, nodded at them through the window. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the flash drive in her pocket as she and Lila approached the car. Whatever happens tonight, Lila said quietly, you've already won by standing up to them. Eleanor gripped the flash drive tightly as she slid into the back seat, the evidence of years of corruption secure in her hand. The car pulled away from the curb, heading toward the lights of the gala glowing in the distance. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers and wealth. Crystal glasses clinked as the university's elite donors congratulated themselves on another successful year. President Halston stood at the podium, mid-speech about academic excellence and institutional integrity, words that hung hollow in the perfumed air. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Eleanor Graves stood framed in the doorway, her posture straight and unwavering. She wore a simple black dress, professional, elegant, and a stark contrast to the milk-stained gown from the previous gala. Lila and her team dispersed quietly into the crowd, blending with the servers and guests. Conversation died like a cut wire. "Isn't that?" someone whispered. "She's on leave." "How dare she?" Eleanor walked directly down the center aisle. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, unhurried. She moved like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. President Halston's voice faltered. "As I was saying, our commitment to—" Eleanor didn't break stride as she climbed the 3 steps to the stage and approached the podium. The microphone picked up Halston's panicked whisper. "You can't be here." "I believe I can," Eleanor said, her voice amplified through the speakers. "In fact, I must." Victor Langford rose from his table near the front, face tightening with controlled rage. "This is inappropriate. Remove her immediately." Security guards hesitated at the doors, unsure. "Before anyone removes me," Eleanor said calmly, "I think the donors deserve to know exactly what their money has been funding." She plugged the flash drive into the podium's built-in computer. Behind her, the projection screen that had been showing university achievements flickered, then changed. A spreadsheet appeared. Names, dates, amounts. "What you're looking at," Eleanor continued, "is a record of payments made to alter grades, falsify transcripts, and override disciplinary actions." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped a glass. "This is absurd," Victor called out, gesturing to security. "Get her off that stage." Eleanor tapped a key. The speakers crackled with Victor's voice. "Make this go away." "Whatever it costs." Another voice. "Sir, changing these grades would violate—" Victor's voice again. "Your department needs a new building, doesn't it? Problems have prices. Solutions do too." The color drained from Victor's face. Travis, sitting beside him, looked up at his father in shock. Eleanor tapped another key. The screens switched to admissions documents, Travis's application alongside his actual academic records. Standardized test scores mysteriously improved. Essays written by paid professionals. Letters of recommendation coerced through financial pressure. Travis stood up, knocking over his chair. "You can't prove any of this." "I don't need to prove it," Eleanor replied evenly. "You've been proving it yourself for years." She played another recording, Travis's voice, laughing. "Papers? I haven't written one since high school. Dad has people for that." The ballroom erupted in commotion. Board members turned to each other in heated whispers. Donors stood up, pointing fingers. Phones rose everywhere, recording the unfolding chaos. "This goes beyond the Langfords," Eleanor continued, tapping another key. More names appeared on the screen. Other wealthy families, other students who had bought their way through education. Victor stormed toward the stage. "This is slander. I'll have you arrested." 2 security guards finally moved toward Eleanor, but stopped when cameras turned their way. In the back, Leela and her team had positioned themselves near the exits, filming everything. "You think you can buy silence forever?" Eleanor asked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You thought power meant immunity. It only meant I had more to uncover." President Halston tried to reach for the microphone. "This presentation is unauthorized." "Like the unauthorized changing of grades?" Eleanor countered, pulling up faculty emails documenting pressure from administration. "Or the unauthorized expulsion of students who threatened to expose this system?" The room had transformed. What began as controlled outrage from the power players had splintered into dozens of individual reactions. Some trustees were already on their phones, calling lawyers. Others were backing away from Victor Langford as if his disgrace might be contagious. Travis stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world crumble. His friends had edged away, creating distance between themselves and the scandal. Security looked at the sea of recording phones, then at each other. One spoke into his radio, uncertainty evident in his posture. The truth was spreading through the room like wildfire, leaping from person to person, phone to phone, uncontained and uncontrollable. Victor lunged forward, his composed mask finally shattering. He grabbed the microphone from its stand, yanking so hard the cord nearly snapped. The sharp screech of feedback cut through the ballroom, making several guests flinch and cover their ears. Crystal glasses trembled on nearby tables as his sudden outburst shattered what little order remained. "This stops now!" he shouted, his voice booming through the speakers. "This woman has fabricated evidence in a vindictive campaign." His voice cracked slightly at the end, not from lack of volume, but from the strain of losing control in a room that had always obeyed him. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still amid the chaos, one hand resting lightly on the laptop, the other at her side. "Are those your final words, Mr. Langford? Because the FBI might be interested in hearing them." Her tone was calm, almost conversational, which only made his rage seem more unhinged. She tapped another key on her laptop. The screens displayed financial transactions, millions flowing from Langford accounts to shell companies, then to university programs, then to individual administrators. The numbers scrolled in cold, undeniable precision, timestamps and account numbers illuminating a pattern too intricate to dismiss as coincidence. 8 years of financial records, Eleanor said, her voice steady. Money laundering through university donations, tax fraud disguised as philanthropy, and let's not forget the bribes. She turned slightly, allowing the crowd to see both her and the evidence at once, forcing them to choose where to look. Victor's knuckles whitened around the microphone. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "You foolish woman. Do you have any idea who I am? Who I know?" His voice dropped lower now, more dangerous than loud, as if trying to reassert the authority that had always worked before. "I know exactly who you are," Eleanor replied, stepping closer. The soft click of her heels echoed in the stunned silence. "A man who taught his son that rules don't apply if you're rich enough. A man who threatened Professor Martinez when she tried to fail Travis for plagiarism. A man who had Dean Williams fired when he questioned admission practices." The crowd gasped. Former Dean Williams had supposedly resigned for health reasons 2 years earlier. Heads turned, whispers spreading rapidly as pieces of the past began to rearrange themselves into something far more sinister. "You pressured 19 different professors to change grades," Eleanor continued, ticking off points on her fingers with deliberate precision. "You funded the construction of the West Campus Library in exchange for your son's guaranteed admission. You donated to the science department with the explicit condition that Travis receive research credits he never earned." Her voice never rose, but each word landed heavier than the last. At the back of the ballroom, the doors opened. 4 people in dark suits entered, moving purposefully through the stunned crowd. Their presence was quiet, but unmistakable, cutting a straight path toward the stage as conversations died mid-sentence around them. "And when Sophia Lynn threatened to expose academic fraud last year, you had her scholarship revoked." Eleanor's voice hardened, the first real edge breaking through her composure. A first-generation college student who worked her way here denied her future because she wouldn't stay silent. The weight of that accusation hung heavier than the financial crimes. Lila stepped forward from the crowd, her phone held high. "I have the recording of that meeting, too." Her voice carried, steady and clear, as she moved to stand just behind Eleanor, no longer hidden. Victor dropped the microphone, the dull thud echoing across the stage, and lunged for Eleanor's laptop. "You think you can—" His hand stretched forward, fingers curled as if he could physically erase what had already been seen. 2 security guards finally moved, but not to stop Eleanor. They blocked Victor's path. Their stance was firm, unyielding, a silent declaration that the balance of power had shifted. "Mr. Langford," a woman in a dark suit announced, flashing credentials. "I'm Special Agent Rivera with the FBI. We need you to step away from the stage." Her voice was calm, practiced, and utterly immune to his presence. The room erupted again. Gasps, exclamations, the frantic clicking of phones capturing every second. The spectacle had transformed into something irreversible. Travis pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with disbelief and anger. "This is ridiculous! My father is one of the biggest donors this school has ever had." His voice cracked, no longer confident but desperate, searching for the authority that always backed him. "That's exactly the problem," Eleanor said. She didn't look at him immediately, letting the silence stretch before turning her gaze toward him with quiet finality. Professor Reeves emerged from the crowd, his earlier fear replaced with resolve. His shoulders, once hunched, were now squared. "Everything Dean Graves has presented is true. I've been pressured to pass failing students for years." His voice trembled at first, then steadied as he continued to stand there. Another professor stood up. "So have I." And another. "The Langfords threatened my tenure when I questioned Travis's lab results. The dam had broken." Faculty members who had stayed silent for years found their voices, sharing stories of coercion and threats. The room filled not just with noise, but with long-suppressed truth finally surfacing all at once. Special Agent Rivera guided Victor away from the stage. "Mr. Langford, we have a warrant to seize financial records related to your foundation and its transactions with this university." Victor's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he tried to regain control through sheer force of will. "My lawyers will bury you all." "Your lawyers are already being questioned downtown," Agent Rivera replied calmly. "This investigation has been ongoing for months." Travis stared at Eleanor with naked hatred, his composure completely gone. "You planned this all along." "No," Eleanor said. "Your actions made this inevitable. I just made sure everyone would see it." Her voice carried no triumph, only certainty. Two more agents approached Victor, one holding handcuffs that glinted under the ballroom lights. "This is absurd!" Travis shouted, looking around desperately for support. "My father built half this campus." His voice echoed, but no one answered. But the mood had shifted entirely. Where there had once been deference, there was now disgust. Where there had been laughter at Eleanor's humiliation, there was now stunned silence at the Langfords' fall. Guests who had once leaned toward Victor now stepped back, creating space as if distance could separate them from what had been revealed. President Halston stood frozen, his career visibly crumbling before his eyes. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. "Your father is being detained on suspicion of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion," Agent Rivera informed Travis. "We'll need to speak with you as well." As Victor was led toward the exit, the crowd that had once parted for him in respect now backed away in revulsion. His empire of influence collapsed in minutes, leaving only the naked truth. The echo of his polished authority was replaced by the sharp clink of handcuffs. Travis stood alone in the center of the room, abandoned by his friends, his father, and the system that had always protected him. The crowd that had once laughed at his prank now stared at him with cold judgment, phones recording his downfall for the world to see. Moments later, the gala was in disarray, but clarity replaced chaos. The initial shock had settled into a strange, electric calm, the kind that only followed when something long buried had finally been dragged into the light and could no longer be denied. FBI agents moved efficiently through the room, their presence no longer questioned but accepted as inevitable, as if the truth itself had summoned them. They moved from group to group with quiet authority, collecting statements, securing devices, documenting everything that moments ago had been dismissed as impossible. Phones continued recording, but the frantic energy had transformed into something more purposeful. Witnesses no longer chasing spectacle, but preserving accountability, capturing the unraveling of a system that had once seemed untouchable. Travis stood rooted to the spot, abandoned by his friends who had quietly slipped away one by one, each creating distance as if disgrace were contagious. The circle that once formed around him had dissolved completely, leaving him exposed in the center of the room where everyone could see him clearly for the first time. His expensive suit, once a symbol of privilege and certainty, now seemed to hang awkwardly on his frame, the sharp tailoring unable to hide the uncertainty creeping into his posture. Without his father's presence anchoring him, without the familiar shield of influence and expectation, he appeared smaller, younger, a boy who had mistaken protection for power and now found himself standing without either. Across the room, President Halston shifted nervously at the edge of the stage, his usual composure fractured by the speed at which control had slipped from his grasp. His eyes moved constantly, darting between Eleanor, the agents, and the remaining board members, searching for alignment, for reassurance, for any signal that the situation could still be managed. The calculation was visible on his face, his career, his legacy, his carefully constructed authority, all recalibrating in real time. The confidence that once defined him had been replaced by something thinner, more fragile. The realization that the structure he had depended on was no longer stable beneath his feet. Finally, he cleared his throat and stepped forward, each movement deliberate as he approached the microphone Eleanor had used to expose years of corruption. The weight of that moment lingered in the air, not because of him, but because of what had already been said, what could not be unsaid. In light of tonight's revelations, he began, his voice lacking the practiced strength it once carried, I wish to immediately reinstate Dr. Eleanor Graves to her rightful position as Dean of Academic Affairs. The announcement settled over the room without applause, without relief, received instead with nods of grim understanding. This was not celebration. This was correction, the slow and necessary adjustment of something that had been allowed to tilt for far too long. Halston continued, the words coming more quickly now, as if urgency might restore authority. Furthermore, he said, sweat beginning to form along his brow, Travis Langford is hereby expelled from this university. Effective immediately. Travis's head snapped up, disbelief overtaking the last remnants of defiance on his face. You can't. It's already done. Halston cut him off, his voice firmer now, strengthened not by conviction, but by the undeniable shift in power around him. Your academic record will reflect dismissal for misconduct. Effective immediately. The words echoed differently than they would have an hour earlier. There was no argument left to support him, no laughter to soften the blow, no ally willing to step forward. Travis looked around, searching instinctively for support, but found only distance, eyes that had once admired him, now avoiding him entirely. 3 board members rose slowly from their seats, their movements drawing attention not through force, but through the quiet gravity of what they represented. The oldest among them, a woman whose tenure had spanned over a decade, stepped forward and took the microphone with hands that did not tremble. I resign my position, effective immediately, she said, her voice steady despite the weight behind it. I was aware of improprieties and chose silence. That ends tonight. Her words landed with more impact than any raised voice could have. 2 more followed, each echoing the same decision in different words, each resignation stripping away another layer of the system that had enabled everything that had just been exposed. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was undeniable. Eleanor moved forward then, reclaiming the microphone without hesitation. The room fell completely silent, not out of obligation, but because attention now belonged to her fully. She stood tall, composed, the faint traces of the milkshake still visible along the edges of her hairline and collar, not concealed, not erased, but present as a reminder of where this moment had begun. What happened here tonight isn't about punishment, Eleanor said, her voice steady and clear, carrying without strain. It's about restoration. This institution was founded to serve knowledge, truth, and growth, not privilege, not protection, not profit. Her gaze moved across the room, not lingering, not accusing, but seeing, truly seeing, the people who had witnessed both the injustice and the exposure of it. Behind her, Lila Grant stepped onto the stage, joined by others who had once been pushed out, dismissed, erased. They stood not as symbols, but as evidence, visible proof of what had been done, and what would now be corrected. These individuals, Eleanor continued, gesturing toward them, were punished for demanding the very standards this university claims to uphold. They will be reinstated with full scholarships and formal apologies. Leela stood with quiet strength, her presence alone enough to challenge every assumption that had once dismissed her. Her eyes moved across the room, meeting the gaze of those who had once ignored her, not with anger, but with clarity. "Beginning tomorrow," Eleanor said, "we will initiate a complete audit of all academic records, donor relationships, and administrative decisions for the past 10 years. This process will be conducted by an independent committee with no ties to current leadership." There were no objections, no interruptions, only the slow shift of understanding settling deeper into the room. Those who participated in fraud will be removed. Those who were harmed will be restored, Eleanor continued. This is not about revenge. It is about making this institution what it was always meant to be. The atmosphere shifted again, not sharply, but steadily, like something heavy being lifted just enough for movement to begin. Conversations did not resume. No one clapped. But something had changed in the way people stood, in the way they looked at one another, in the absence of denial where it had once thrived. Tonight marks the end of buying grades, positions, and silence, Eleanor concluded, and the beginning of earning them. She stepped away from the microphone without pause, without waiting for reaction, because none was required. The moment had already done what it needed to do. Eleanor gathered her papers, nodded to Lila and the others, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before her, not in fear, not in deference, but in recognition. Students who had witnessed her humiliation now stood aside with newfound respect. Faculty members who had once avoided eye contact now met her gaze directly. She passed Travis, still standing alone in the center of the room. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. For perhaps the first time in his life, he had nothing to say that mattered. Eleanor walked out of the building, her steps measured and confident. She was no longer ignored or dismissed. The justice she had forced into the open followed her like a second shadow. Not triumphant, not vengeful, simply undeniable. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.